and welcome to the SquaMates podcast. This is a very serious podcast about herpetology, and I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Dr. Mark D. Schertz. I'm the curator of herpetology at the Natural History Museum of Denmark, and I'm joined this lovely, fine afternoon by Herald Naik.
Hi everyone, I'm Herald Naik. I'm a snake ecologist from South Africa.
And Ethan Kosek.
Hi, I'm Ethan Kosek. I'm a cartoonist, illustrator, and I never worked in herpetology, but I have a lot of animals.
And Gabriel Legetto.
Hi, and I'm Gabriel Legetto, and I'm a scientific illustrator, paleo artist, concept artist, and I used to work in herpetology, but not anymore.
Except that this is your vice to come back all the time. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
Once you're a herpetologist, you're always a herpetologist.
Exactly. It's the lens through which we view the world. Okay. And that lens is sometimes rosy and sometimes foggy. And here we have some rosy and foggy things for you this afternoon. So, what have you guys been up to? How's it going? How is everything?
Who wants to go first?
What's newts from the world of newts?
A lot of newts. A lot of breeding activity in the newt room. I got eggs from the Alpines. I was going to say the Spanish ribs, but they're always going at it.
That's Neurogus crocata. No.
Pleurodeles, Pleurodeles. I can never say them.
Waltle is a very unpleasant name to say.
They're like little tiny manatees in the water, and they pretty much breed every time I do a water change, so that doesn't really count.
But do you have what are they called?
Crocatus.
Crocatus as well, right?
Yep, I have Crocatus.
I have the types here in the collection in Copenhagen.
Nice.
We can talk about this sometime.
Yeah. I have. What else is breeding? Well, the big news this week is that I was taking the trash out last night and I found a fire salamander that I lost 4 years ago as a baby. It got out of this little container I had it in, and somehow it has survived 4 winters. It skipped all of the pandemic. And she was doing great. She looks like $1 million. So
yeah.
I would like to know is how was the moisture level high enough for this salamander to be able to shed and stuff?
So I have a very damp garage where I found her, which sometimes has a little bit of a flooding issue.
Ideal.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, I have escapees. Sometimes it happens. That same section last year, I found a marbled newt that got out as a baby, but it was only gone for like 6 months, and it was the biggest one I've ever seen.
Still quite a lot of time.
Yeah. And like I've never seen one get I have meticulously raised these things by hand, and I've never gotten one that big in that amount of time before.
I mean,
so now I'm like, should I just seed the garage with
not with invasive species, my boy, but
clearly they can't get out of there. But yeah,
that's right. True. That's true. They're not going anywhere.
Free range them.
I mean, This is like somehow the polar opposite of the experience of most pet owners who have like a hamster get out and then it just dies inside the wall. There's
a shitload of spiders and house centipedes down there. So and plus there's loose feeder insects all over my basement. So I have to assume that that they have plenty of food.
Amazing. Wow. I mean, that is truly serendipitous.
Yeah. The only fugitive unaccounted for now is an Anides lugubris that I believe is under my stairs. I have seen little tracks, but I have not been able to find him.
Oh, God.
Anides are little cave salamanders, right?
They're big, actually. They're arboreal salamanders.
Arboreal salamanders, okay.
They have huge freaking teeth, too.
Okay. Yes, I have seen the teeth. Yes, very cool. Well, not ideal to have one on the loose, but
No.
it's adorable to have the little tippy tap.
I would be afraid, to walk at night and think that I'm going to step on something. So I would be like making sure that I'm not stepping on any loose
You have
element there.
to move without rhythm.
Yeah.
To use your torch all the time to walk around.
Yes.
How are things in Florida, Gabriel?
Good. If the thing that one of the things that has happened to me lately is that now I can say that I am going to be I already illustrated the new book on dinosaur behavior by Dr. Dave Hone. That's going to come out in November. I did a ton of illustrations, of really cool illustrations and line drawings.
The cover is beautiful.
It's part of a large, of a much larger illustration that you can see full inside the book, and it's an homage to Don Henderson big illustration on Coelophysis, and this shows a bunch of Coelophysis foraging within a Triassic forest. So I'm really excited for that book to come out in November.
Really cool.
Yeah, and yeah. So I'm working on a lot of other stuff that I cannot really discuss right now, but hopefully I will be able to tell you more about it soon.
Great. And for you, Hiral?
Oh, I have been PhDing very hard. And it is so fun, as we all know. But it is coming together. I think I have one almost complete chapter, which is
Great.
kind of exciting. And to keep my kind of herp life alive, I sometimes go and rescue snakes. Unfortunately, sometimes that means dead snakes. So I caught this really beautiful adult male vine snake about a week ago. It was caught in someone's fence. And so, yeah, I pretty much, I left him out into the bush. It had been raining, so I thought something would come and eat him. Nothing came for about a day. But then the day after I caught him, I think it was the warthogs that came and took a bite out of the vine snake. But yeah. But the rain also means there's been lots of frogs. Well, I can hear the frogs, but I can't see them. They tend to stay hidden away. So yeah, all those rain frogs, I hear them all the time, but they're hidden away.
Do they actually call from underground?
No, so they'll usually pop up.
Because I mean, there are a bunch of frogs that do call from underground. Some of them even use burrows that they have enlarged as kind of echo chambers. But I mean, the rain. So I mean, Ethan, you have rain frogs, right? And they are a TikTok sensation.
Mine are definitely two females, though, so I have not heard any actual vocalizing from them. But all the stuff I've seen, they always seem to emerge and then call from even the videos of the TikTok stuff. So
I don't think I'm familiar with the sound, with the call. What's the call sound like?
It is not the one that people think it is, which is the squeaky toy.
No, it's chirpy.
It's
It's like a little. It's actually not very loud either. It's a quiet little bell-like chirp almost.
Yeah, Hiral, can you do an impression?
No.
It must sound a lot different when there's like a whole lot of them doing it, though. Like,
yeah, right.
Do they form choruses?
Yeah, occasionally.
That's nice. I don't think I've ever heard it. I'm gonna have to go search videos of rain frogs calling to see what they sound like.
Does it get loud with a lot of them doing it, or is it still fairly?
Yeah, no, it does.
Yeah.
And then there's obviously a bunch of the river frogs and all of the others going out in the background as well. So sometimes it is difficult to distinguish, but yeah, pretty cool.
Do you live close to like a wetland, or is it just like?
There's just river systems, but I live next to a large canyon, So there's kind of water trickling down in a lot of these areas.
Lovely.
It's really, really healthy frog populations here,
Cool.
I reckon.
I get the sense that the rain frogs there fill pretty much the same niche as our spadefoot toads do here. Sort of a desert dwelling. They seem to really, like, I've been kind of keeping them that way, and that seems like they're like almost the same type of thing. So
Yeah, I mean, it's an ecomorph, right? So they're converged. So many different groups of frogs have converged on this thing of hiding away when it's dry and coming out when it's wet. And not a lot of frogs actually hunt underground. So most of them come up to the surface, eat, and then go under. There are some exceptions probably, but not a large number. And yeah, I mean, a lot of them are even anatomically really, really similar.
Yeah.
So like European spadefoots and the American spadefoots and the Australian pseudo spadefoots. And
there's only so many ways you can be a frog underground.
Yeah, I mean, the optimal shape. I was just reading a paper about this actually that was like the optimal shape for for burrowing in mammals is mole shape, right? Large front paddles.
This came up with me as well because I posted a thing on Blue Sky that was like
mole shaped, right? Yeah.
Well, I posted a thing that was, well, this is dumb, but I was like, why are there no mammal snakes? Essentially, why are there no legless mammals? I mean, the closest I could think of were whales, and that's kind of cheating. And I had somebody who studied leglessness kind of say, well, partly it's because mammals do this and not that, and that mammals tend to dig
this, by the way, for our audio listeners, is the uppy downy and not the side to side.
Yes, sorry. Mammals dig with their face.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of animals, like, tell that to amphibians.
No, I'm sorry. Mammals dig with their forepaws.
With their forepaws.
Everything else digs with its face. I had it wrong.
Just like amphibians, which are mole lizards that have the flappies at the front. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, but they're all most amphibians do dig with their face. Some of them may have shovel like snouts.
Shovelies. Yes.
Why no cat snake, though?
Why no cat snake? Well, I put it to you, weasels and stoats.
Yeah.
Which are awfully long. The mustelids, but again, it's the uppy downy that creates the inability to go that sinusoidal motion that we use for locomotion. It's very good in the water. Hey, look, another reason why an aquatic origin hypothesis for snakes is crap. Because, like, going through water is much more efficient uppy downy than it is, is it?
No.
It doesn't matter. No. That's the conclusion. I take it all back.
You cannot say that, yes. No. You can definitely not say that.
Look, this is how hypotheses are formed and then thrown away, that we make new hypotheses based on logic and knowing things about nature. Anyway, I mean, I was going to make a point about, like, mole-shaped mammals and frogs and things and then snakes. And anyway, it doesn't matter. We've covered it all. Anyway, from my side, for all of the exciting things that are going on, I also don't have a huge number of updates other than things in process. So we're getting some proof soon for a new subspecies. Ooh, very controversial. We even got some pushback on subspecies from one of the reviewers. But anyway,
very good reviewer.
To it. We're sticking to it. Yeah.
I like that reviewer.
In any case, so we've got that coming out. We got some major revisions on a very exciting paper that I have reached out to a major media corporation about, who will go now nameless for the time being, and they have not responded yet, which is a little bit annoying. So I need to try again. But in any case, there's some exciting stuff going on. But honestly, most of the time that I'm working, I'm focusing on writing grants. I do have one piece of major news, very exciting news, which is that I got through to the interview round for the ERC starting grant, which is, for those who don't know, Europe's largest independent researcher career grant, basically. So it would be 1.5 million euros to do some very cool genomic stuff. It's a very large grant. And actually just getting through to the interview was enough of an exciting thing that I went to the shops and bought quite a lot of cake. Shared it with my colleagues. So that's very exciting. The interview will be sometime in June. So that will be consuming my brain from the end of this month onward. But I've got quite a lot of deadlines coming up at the moment with other grants. So at the moment, it's full steam ahead with lots of grants and stuff. I don't know if I mentioned the last time that I submitted a grant for doing a full reference quality genome in the field, which is quite a cool notion. If I did mention it, then I apologize for repeating. But it turns out the major challenge of sequencing high-quality genomes in the field is not the technology. The technology is there. It's power. Electricity is the main thing that's stopping you from doing anything in the field. So in this grant, you have to be like, why would you not do this under, what is the real challenge? And I was like, well, you can't even do this in a village, because the villages don't have electricity either when you get out into the boonies where the vast majority of life on Earth is. So we have to find a solution for this if we want to have the hope of fulfilling things like the Earth Biogenome Project.
Have you tried a hand crank?
Yeah, well, it comes down to more or less getting 13 people on bicycles. No, no, the solution is largely solar panels and possibly diesel or petrol generators, which, of course, are transportable, even if the fuel is heavy and the generators themselves are very heavy. We can get those out into pretty remote places. So, the plan is basically to try and do that, which I think would be quite cool. This is for something called the Willem Experiment Grant, which is not their official byline or tagline, but essentially they only fund stupid ideas. And so here's my stupid idea, and we'll see if they let me do it. It would be quite funny, I think. Anyway, so that's there's lots of funding things going in. I've got one on chameleons, I've got one on frogs, both about kind of miniaturization type themes, and some other manuscripts that are along the way. But it's more of the same. Oh, you listeners are so bored of hearing us talk about ourselves all the time. Let's talk about some Caecilian lunch, wherein the Caecilians are the lunch. There was a pretty cool paper. The paper is by Henrik Bringsøe and Niels Dreyer, who are two Danes, actually. Hello to both of them. Greetings from Copenhagen. The paper is entitled Kleptoparasitism in Micrurus mipartitus, competing for the same Caecilia in Western Colombia, published in the journal Herpetozoa very, very recently, which made some waves on the socials.
Yes, because how many times are you going to see two coral snakes fighting over a Caecilian? Which are all animals that are not easy to find.
I was going to say, I didn't know until we started discussing this that there were coral snakes that were Caecilian specialists.
Yeah.
Well, not specialists, but coral snakes do tend to go for, or a lot of species of coral snakes do tend to go for long-bodied prey. So a lot of them prey on eels. There are other circumstances where they have been noted to prey on Caecilians. Also, other snakes. A lot of coral snakes prey on other snakes. So it's not so much the fact. What's surprising about this note is not so much the fact that they are preying on Caecilians. That has been observed before. Actually, I have seen another. I remember another observation. I think it was somebody that was going to submit a note, but I don't know if the note is submitted yet. But they found another snake preying on a Caecilian, and this is the weird part, on an intertidal zone, which it's crazy to think that Caecilians I mean, the cross-link on an intertidal zone is pretty crazy, but a Caecilian on an intertidal zone is extremely crazy. So, but I don't know if the node is submitted yet. So I don't know if we can talk about it much. But with
some Caecilians must be more hardy and tolerant than we thought, because there are invasives in your neck of the woods. So.
Oh yeah, well yeah, we have them here, and a lot of the canals here are brackish sometimes. So they sometimes have been able to survive. And like I was telling Ethan off the recording, yes, of the record, I just checked the records, pun intended, here in South Florida, and Caecilia, the Typhlonectes natans, which is the one that we have here, has expanded considerably. So we have now, I mean, I thought that they were secluded in a small area, but no, we have them in a lot of canals apparently. So
just a brief side note on that, and I think we've talked a little bit about it in the past, but they used to be commonplace in the pet trade. They cost in the 90s about like $20. They were sold as rubber eels in the aquarium, mostly in the aquarium hobby, and then they disappeared. They stopped being imported. And apparently some of them must have gotten loose in Florida, and now you're starting to see them again in the pet trade because people are going down and collecting them.
Well, it's crazy that I would never imagine that Caecilians are weird. And that species, which is a species that lives in northern Colombia and northwestern Venezuela, it's not weird, common. I don't see, I have never seen one. So it's weird that they have become so, but I guess it shouldn't surprise me since everything seems to do really well in urban Florida. So
it's paradise. It's the new Garden of Eden.
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, I do wonder, are they must be competing with like Amphiomas and stuff like that.
Well, we have Amphiomas and we have Sirens here, and I would imagine that they're basically going through the same. We have Sirens and we have Sirenians, so there. But it's true. But Sirenians, for all those who know, it's what the group of manatees are called. But yeah, going back to because we went on a very long tangent. Going back to the note, this is really cool because the note, it's a short note, also stated that Caecilians have been recently found to possibly be resistant to coral snake venom, and that means that they have probably evolved a resistance to coral snake venom, which is, I didn't know that until I read this paper, but this is based on a paper on 2023 that recently states that. And it just struck me as very weird that you find, that you observed intraspecific combat for prey on snakes, which I don't think is super common to observe in non-captives, like in the wild. And on top of that, that is a Caecilian. The authors, because the Caecilian was obviously consumed, I don't think they could eventually examine the Caecilian and know what Caecilian species it is. And because Caecilians are difficult to identify if you don't have them like under a microscope, they say that the species is probably Caecilia leucocephala or Caecilia perdita, which are two of the Caecilians that are commonly found in this part of Colombia where the observation was made. And also another thing that was interesting about this note is that the coral snakes, when they were fighting over the Caecilian, during the whole process, bit each other. And I was going to ask Hiral about this as our resident snake person. Have you seen opportunity, like in other opportunities where venomous snakes bite each other when they are the same species, and how do they react to that?
Yeah, so I mean, we have that with cobras quite a lot. Naturally, they enjoy eating each other. Some cobras more than others. But there's also a resistance between some different species. So for something like a puff adder, is Bitus aretans, and boomslang, Dyspholidus typus. They wouldn't naturally interact in the wild so much. But if they do come across each other, naturally So for those that don't know, boomslang have really potent venom, much stronger than most other snakes. And so drip by drip, it would kill the puff adder. So in that situation, the puff adder, if it was really hungry, then it would go for the boomslang. But that's why it begs the question, like, okay, well, if two of these Micrurus species are fighting over one Caecilian, like what's the reason? I don't know if they mention it in the paper, but there's very interesting dynamics that cause us to think about why snakes would go for another venomous animal if it's has the odds of dying in the process.
Right. So, I mean, I guess part of this that ties into is Caecilians are also thought to be venomous. I mean, so there's a certain amount of, potentially a certain amount of risk involved. The potency of Caecilian venom has yet to be tested as far as I know. So, and whether or not it's actually effective, again, snakes would be a really good question. I mean, it would be very cool if there's multimodal protection. So if they have this venom resistance, in addition to actually being venomous themselves against the snakes, you could imagine a kind of arms race that would quickly arise, right?
Yeah, so venom evolution is something we don't really know much about. Besides, I mean, we're still learning a little bit more about the toxicity levels of certain species. But when it comes to their ecological roles, that's something completely unknown in many situations.
I wonder if because coral snakes kind of don't have the best vision, right? They tend to be more fossorial.
Yeah.
Coral snakes have very weird anatomy. Here's one I brought out earlier.
Well, I was just going to say, can they see their own? I was going to say, can they see their own aposematic coloration?
Yeah.
I don't know that they can.
It would surprise me if they couldn't, but of course that's always a possibility. So I have in front of me a couple of specimens of of the species in question. So you can see, if you're looking at the video feed over on youtube.com/SquaMatesPod, you can see actually the coloration of the snakes is quite dark in dorsal view. I don't know if this is true of all the different subspecies of this species. Gabriel, thoughts?
No, I mean, it's normally when you see them in life, they are black with white rings, and the white rings are quite distinct. They have a red nuchal ring and some red rings on the tail. But but the rings are visible.
Tail, obviously, in a preserved specimen, all of those colors are kind of gone.
Faded.
I wonder if they have a little bit of that kind of tail head mimicry going on. Obviously, the tail is not blunt, but having the head and the tail kind of similar colors allows you to kind of play with that kind of deception. But I think what's really interesting about Micrurus in particular is that they have a very small head, a very narrow gape, a very comparatively narrow gape. So, these are snakes. It's a very long animal, this one, relative to the girth. So it's a thin, long animal, which makes it actually very well suited for eating noodle-shaped objects like eels and Caecilians, right?
They like little wormy guys.
Yeah.
They are kind of little wormy guys. I think that the other thing that's really interesting here is if you look at the ventral aspect of the snake, they are much more starkly banded. I imagine the white bands are really, really stark on the belly. So when you can imagine that these things are probably also using a similar defense to many other snakes, where they kind of show a piece of the belly. Obviously, for the American listeners, you may be familiar with ringneck snakes, which do this to an extreme degree, where they invert half of the body in order to show off the belly. In kind of self-defense, or
we have coral snakes here.
threatening. Well, yes, but only in the southern states and not very often seen, whereas ringnecks are common and very bright.
But the thing is that coral snakes, when they one of the common threat displays of coral snakes is that they put their head under the body, or they coil their body with their head under the body, and then they raise the tail and they move it. So that head-tail mimicry is something that is common to most coral snakes, all the coral snakes that I'm aware of. The good thing is that the thing that this paper notes is that they say that coral snakes usually rely on chemosensory signals to hunt for prey more than vision, which is what Ethan was saying.
Yeah.
And they say that probably some of the mucus from the Caecilian had rubbed under the other snake's body, and that's one of the reasons why they could have beat each other while fighting over this
so
prey
therefore,
item.
the mucus also could be a form of defense where it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The mucus is definitely yes.
Yeah.
You look at those again. If you're looking at the video, you can see the teeny tiny eyes relative to head size. They're really, really small. Which obviously for a snake that's semifossorial, and you can imagine if they're semifossorial and it's a good place to be looking for Caecilians in any case. So you kind of adapted into that. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. So I've actually seen snakes fighting because they were being cohabbed and fighting over a single prey item, which has... it ended fine for both parties involved, but they did bite each other. And I think that's quite a common...
It doesn't always end fine.
It's not intentional. On the other hand, my observations of snake feeding in general don't give me the strongest impression of snake intelligence. Obviously, we will have a proper full episode on snake intelligence and reptile intelligence in the future. The requests that we've received from listeners have been duly noted, and that will be given some attention in the future. But I would just say that, from personal observations of multiple different snake feedings, I have seen snakes try to eat moss. I have seen snakes try to eat themselves. Like, there is a very powerful feeding instinct associated with thing in mouth.
Well, there's a good reason that most keepers of snakes
don't cohab. You should not cohab, yeah.
Or if you do cohab, don't feed
together.
Right.
Yeah. Which, or at least, so what we did, this was back in, quite a few years ago. We had two Antaresia pythons together, and they were being cohabbed. And the tank was fairly large, and you'd be able to lure one over to one side of the tank and feed it a rat while you had the other one kind of on the other side. And then you could quickly get the rat to the other one, and then they would be eating at the same time. The problem was that one of them was much, much faster at eating than the other. So it would scoff its food, and then it would go on over and try to steal from the partner. And so, it became quite quickly apparent that keeping those two snakes together was not a good idea.
Last year, our sand boas had a litter of 23 babies. So,
oh my goodness!
I had to cohab a little bit because I didn't have 23 individual containers ready to go. I wasn't expecting 23 babies, but I still had to feed them individually because otherwise they would just try to. Once they get going.
This is true, by the way, of all reptiles and to some extent amphibians as well. But so there's been a lot of discussion about this topic for specifically chameleons and raising chameleons on the Chameleon Academy podcast by Bill Strand, where so what happens with chameleons is that they often also have very large litters. And then people who are not expecting to have suddenly 50 offspring, which can happen in Camellia calyptratus if they're overfed, you have these enormous litters, and then you're not at all prepared for housing 50 individuals, 50 juveniles individually. And so people have been cohabbing them for a very long time. And this inevitably goes ill. So, I guess to some extent, people might be doing it with the kind of the mentality of like survival of the fittest and whatever. The people they'll fight their way through whatever. But you will observe. It's like guaranteed if you cohab in a way that you're raising multiple juveniles together, you will see bullying and dominance from some individuals that cause a feebleness and eventual death of the smaller individuals.
I think it's a little more accepted in amphibian raising because you're going to lose a certain percentage of them anyway.
Right.
Like axolotls can drop 600 on you at a time.
Oh God. Yes. Yeah. So I think that's probably. That's fairly obviously the case. I can imagine that in some of the dart frogs where it's like a couple of eggs, that it's less the case, right? But in these things that are strategists, they are set out. It would be bad for the population if every toad survived to adulthood.
Right. And you see weird things happen when you have that many of them come through. I've had twins develop in one egg and stuff. Like I've seen some shit, man.
It's surprisingly common in red-eared sliders that they get you have Siamese twins. The axial bifurcation of red-eared sliders is surprisingly common. I've seen loads of them. I really hope we would have some here in the collection, but I haven't found any yet. So they're really common invasive species in Denmark, but they're not considered invasive because they haven't yet been documented to reproduce naturally in ponds here. It's only a matter of time. But yeah. Anyway, we have been talking. How did we get here?
In any case, it's worth noting that this is a super cool observation because the whole animals involved are very seldomly seen, especially Caecilians, and Micrurus mipartitus is a nocturnal coral snake that is not super common. I mean, it's not uncommon, but it's not. Coral snakes are not readily found all the time because they are mostly fossorial, secretive, and nocturnal. And I must say that this observation, the author said that the subspecies, Micrurus mipartitus, is a species that lives in Panama, northern Colombia, and Venezuela, and it has several subspecies. And the subspecies that they are talking about here is the nominal subspecies. So it's Mipartitus mipartitus. And the observation was made in a forest reserve in Colombia, in Valle del Cauca, called Reserva Natural San Cipriano, and it was near sea level, which is odd because in Venezuela, mipartitus, which is the subspecies that live there, is mostly a mountain snake. So I thought that this is a very interesting note. This is a once in a lifetime observation. You don't run into this kind of observations every day.
Yeah. I mean, you're lucky if you find a Caecilian. You're very lucky if you find a coral snake on the same day.
It's like winning the lottery.
You're extremely lucky if you find one preying on the other, and you're even like it's crazy if you find two fighting over one.
Yeah. It is pretty bonkers. So I think one thing that you can take away from this, listeners, for those of you who are not professional herpetologists, but are herpetoculturalists or herp enthusiasts or field herpers or whatever, you can go and make some very exciting observations and publish them. There are venues and journals for that. There are this article is kind of a full-length article in Herpetozoa, which is one of the journals that you can do this in. But there are also venues for publishing very, very short observations, especially in Herpetological Review. You can publish extremely short natural history observations if you see something that is unique and exciting.
And if you can document it too, especially.
And if you can document it in a reasonable way, although a lot of the articles... I use articles kind of generally here because the articles in the natural history notes section of Herpetological Review are usually about a paragraph long. So using the word article is maybe a bit of a stretch. But in any case, the natural history records that go into there, they're not always photographically documented. Some of them are just like they state that it's been observed.
Yeah, but I meant like, so, if you are like not a herpetologist, I would advise you that if you observe something, document it and then contact the herpetologist. You can probably write a note together, and that would be awesome, because we do need those observations. We are so in need of natural history observations of basically all species of reptiles and amphibians, and that's very much needed. So if you observe something, photograph it, document it, video it will be the best. And then contact a herpetologist, and you can probably both write a very interesting note together that can be published in one of these journals. Yeah,
definitely. I was just thinking about this quite a lot because we're working on a grant about chameleon metabolism and how chameleons fit into their ecological niche and how they interact with each other. They make these communities because there are certain locations in Madagascar where there are a lot of chameleons that live together, like 15 species that are coexisting in a single location. And as I was working on the introduction to this grant, which I'm co-writing with the prospective student who wants to do the project, I realized that, for when we're writing about these chameleons, the specific information that we have on any species is almost zero. So we usually know things about the anatomy because the species has been described at some point. We might know something about the coloration, sexual dimorphism or something. And then everything after that is inferred based on like general knowledge. So like, what is the diet of this species? Well, we don't know, but we know what the general diet of chameleons is. They are all generalists. But specific information about this one, nah. How's the behavior of the species? Well, we know actually from a different genus of chameleons that chameleon reproduction usually works like this, and chameleon species interactions work like this, and this kind of thing. Like, the gaps in our knowledge are so much greater than what we actually know for these species. It's quite a farce to be writing an introduction that's like, oh, we think we know a couple things about chameleons. Like, I've got this fantastic book co-edited by Crystal Tolley and Anthony Harrell, which is the biology of chameleons, which is, I don't know how many chapters, but it's a really, really excellent resource for knowledge about chameleon biology. And so much of it is just like a house of very rickety cards. That's not to dismiss what the research that has been done. There's been some fantastic research done on some of these groups. So for instance, there's this really, really detailed and brilliantly set out series of papers on chameleon reproductive habits in, I think, Portugal or Spain. I think it must have been Spain. So like they did super, super detailed studies and published them as a series of papers, which is brilliant. But that's basically the only thing we know about like mate choice and sexual selection and things within chameleons. And we know that chameleons are hugely diverse. Obviously, there's been continuing fantastic work by Crystal Tolley and her team and other people working on different groups. But like the pieces are so small. We don't know this for the vast majority of species. And that's chameleons, one of the most charismatic groups in the world of reptiles, I guess. So
I hear that and I immediately think it's really a shame that the academic side and the herpetoculture side don't work together more closely.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like that could really bridge the gap, and that's not there.
I think that there's a lot of reasons for that.
No doubt. Yeah,
elitism, not least among them, but also just impenetrability, the lack of systematic data collection. Like there are really concerted efforts to organize citizen scientists or citizen data collectors into
that is very important. I think that's because the I mean, I'm sorry to say, but the herpetoculture can be problematic So it's not probably my safest avenue to deal with first. I think
let me be clear too that I am not saying that in a pro global exotic pet trade kind of way. I'm not at all. But I do look at like some of the stuff that was done on the aquarium side of stuff with some of these keepers who have worked with species and to document, and I go, why can't we do that?
Yes. Well, I think so. For example, there are loads of people who keep Europlatus in captivity, leaf-tailed geckos. Loads of people, hundreds of breeders worldwide. It's a very established community. There's very active trade. Obviously, they're CITES regulated, so there's some protection, although within the US, for example, CITES doesn't matter, which is a little bit bonkers, but anyway. But there is not a single publication on courtship in Europlatus. It has never been described. All of the intimate movements of the body, because we know that they do things, they wave their tails and stuff, they do gaping maybe, we don't really know. None of that has ever been systematically documented and described. Doesn't you'll find a video, maybe, but not like in words breaking it down, not looking at multiple different mating events and seeing what's consistent and what's not. And that's the level that we need. So individual observation is one thing. If you're a serious breeder and you're breeding something that we really don't know a lot about, you have the opportunity to get in touch with a herpetologist. Please not me. But to get in touch with a herpetologist and try to coordinate how you can make observations that really would substantially advance things.
I wish that you were the one editing this so that I could put your email at the bottom. So I can, write it down.
Yes, I am in control. I'll give them Gabriel's email just for fun.
Know nothing about Europlanet.
Well, no. But in any case, my point is basically that you can coordinate to gather a fantastic data set if you're working with species that we don't know a lot about. There are limitations to that, which is always this massive asterisk of captivity, right? And everyone's like, all behavior in captivity is not the same as in the wild, which is true. But if we can observe things like courtship behavior. So, I've observed courtship behavior among Triturus newts in captivity. It's no different than in the wild. It's closer quarters and less choice, perhaps. But in principle, all of the gestures and the motions and the tail waggling and the deposition of the spermatophore and everything, those things are exactly as they are in the wild. Yep. Timing is the same. And those are the things that matter, because a lot of these things are down to timing. When does this event happen?
It goes even to, for more rare species, it goes to basic natural history things. Yes. To tell you an example, in South America, there are these arboreal lizards that live in the canopies that are similar to abronias in shape, but they are microteads, they're gymnostelmids, and they're called anadias. But they're very similar to abronias in general shape. They're called anadias, and they live in the canopies. And nobody knows basically anything about those lizards.
Anadias and Anides are way too close together in the alphabet.
Yeah. Is that the one that... So
a friend of mine had one individual that of a species that is very, very large but very rarely seen. And he kept it on a terrarium for a while. And the thing at night slept inside the water of the Vermilion Center.
Wow.
That is
super cool.
Crazy, because we cannot tell for sure that that's what they're doing in the wild, but it's so interesting to know that behaviors like that are completely unknown. And you don't know that until you have some closer view that often only happens in captivity sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say I tagged you in on that one that somebody found collecting moss for a terrarium.
That wasn't an idea, yeah.
Yeah, I think they were in Peru, or they said
Colombia.
Colombia. Yeah. And I was like, I think it's a Jimmy, but Gabriel.
It wasn't an Nadia. That's what's one of them. Yeah.
And I've actually co-authored papers with people who have observed, who've made recordings of frogs calling that nobody's ever heard before. Like, that's a really basic thing. The video is Martin Maddock who uploaded the image or the video to iNaturalist, and I wrote it when I saw that. I was like, this is the first ever recorded call. We should publish this. Not only is it the first recorded call of the species, it's the first recorded call of any species from this species group. And it confirms that they have the same call structure as everything else from the species, from the genus, which is remarkable in and of itself. So those kinds of things are always exciting. I think there is no better and more remarkable demonstration of the power of citizen science than Jody Rowley and co.'s Frog ID app and coordinated program, which is just both inspirational and astonishing in its scope. And so, we have a lot of people on the planet, and if we all just made a little bit of an effort to record the things that we see and realize how important they could be, I think a lot of it goes down to us a lot of people not really realizing what they're observing is so significant. Yeah. One thing that I would say as a request, if you observe anything like this and you have plans for your evening, like anything like the Caecilian observation, you had plans for your evening, they are over, this is what you're doing now. The reason is, the vast majority of observations of this kind that come out, the observations stopped at some point because people were impatient and they didn't want to. I have published papers like this. They didn't want to sit and wait for the stupid snake to finish eating the prey item because it takes a long time, especially if the prey item is really big. And then your observation is really incomplete because what's really interesting is to know from prey capture, which obviously you might not have in a case like this. But anyway, like, how is the minimum length of time between prey capture and totally engulfing the prey? So be persistent and patient and try to observe the whole event because people don't. And then the data that we get is still very fragmentary.
Yeah. So I have a really cool story where I think about a year and a half ago, I actually observed a vine snake so from the point of prey capture, it caught this bird. So this is Stelatornis capensis. We get it in sub-Saharan Africa.
Also quite a venomous snake.
Yes. But a very cool snake. It's a tree-living snake. We think that it's supposed to be eating birds, but there aren't very many records. So long story short, I spent about 3 hours observing the snake trying to eat this bird. But coming back to our conversation about, vision and scent earlier, the bird fell down. So this was a juvenile, I think, dark-capped bulbul. So, there's these bulbuls alarm calling, this bird trying to feed on this chick. And then, snakes as they are, they get tangled in branches and lose their food. So the snake pretty much tracked the prey item all the way down, using both vision and scent. Unfortunately, the chick kind of got stuck in between this log and the base of another tree. And the snake tried and tried and tried, and 3 hours later, there was a dead bird and a snake that did not have any food. And
very frustrated snake.
Yeah. And just to think about the records, so there's a really cool Facebook group called Predation Records of Reptiles and Frogs in Sub-Saharan Africa. A really cool paper on the Facebook group and the use of it for citizen science, published a few years ago, called Sharing for Science. And it was really cool because you're adding these observations to what people might not know about. And just on that group, like through that group, we've been able to observe some amazing feeding observations, which has been pretty remarkable for what we now know about reptile and amphibian ecology in Southern Africa.
Yeah, there's an astonishing variety of Facebook groups of that kind as well. So you would be amazed how many different like citizen science focused Facebook groups there are that are doing more or less exactly that. It reminds me of another thing that recently I saw something about one of the Corallus species where they were, basically showing that these things really are not actually adapted for eating birds, even though everyone always is like, these are tree snakes, they eat birds. It's like, nah, they don't. Like, almost never. There are so few records. I actually have a paper that we're working on about the Malagasy tree boas and what they eat and their anatomy and convergence with the South American tree boas and also, chondropython and all of those, like, or Morelia. So all of those.
The assumption, right, was that they have pits, so they must be grabbing warm-blooded prey out of the
and also the
air.
length of the teeth.
It's so there you do come across these snakes in this characteristic hunting pose, but like how often do they actually get anything in that hunting pose? And also the tooth adaptation, this extremely elongated teeth, which you do see in these tree-ish snakes as well as those pits, is probably an adaptation for the percentage of the body that is involved in the constriction versus maintenance of grip.
Okay.
Whereas, if these animals are hunting up in the tree, they use a larger percentage of the body for, I think it's this way around, constriction of the prey item, because they don't have to hold on with as much in order to maintain the grip. Whereas something like boa constrictor, which also hunts arboreally, needs to use a larger percentage of the body because it doesn't have a larger percentage of the body to hold on to the tree, because it doesn't have as good a grip on the prey item, because it doesn't have those super long fangs that you see in Morelia and Corallus. And Sanzinia, but Sanzinia are a bit of a weird one anyway, because Sanzinia are largely, semi-terrestrial, let's say. This kind of semi-arboreal, semi-terrestrial weirdos.
But also, that some of that could be leftovers from evolution. There is a lot of things to weigh on that.
But the biggest problem is that we don't have enough prey or predation observations of these animals. Your chance of finding them is very, very slim. But the vast majority of observations of Sanzinia predation is lemurs and small other mammals. So birds are not really featuring on that list.
My advice to anybody that is observing reptiles or amphibians out there is that get your video. Now, all of us have video now on our phone, so get your video and just every time you find something, observe it. Just sit there, observe it, and see what it does. Because chances are, and these are very good chances, even with common animals, that you're going to observe something that nobody has seen before or documented before. Because you would be surprised of how little we know about all reptiles and amphibians. So, any observation is a good observation.
With the small asterisk that the animals that are very, very common in very suburban areas sometimes have like multi-volume textbooks just about them. So it's not always the case. Like, I wouldn't want to go out and observe Zootoca vivipara for their behavioral stuff, because I don't really want to have to read the textbook about that species in order to find out what is not known. But certainly that is the case as soon as you go even a little bit out of like the dominantly inhabited areas.
Yeah, and that might be
Europe
and that might
US.
be more true. That might be true for Europe, but even here in the United States, our common lizards, we don't know that much about them. I mean, you could even make the case for something like the green anomaly, which is has been, the first lizard genomes and all that. We still don't know much about how different populations behave. Like green anomalies here in South Florida are very different from the rest. So, they behave differently and they interact with lizards in a different way. So any observation that you do in most species is going to be an interesting one.
Definitely. And if you're very lucky and persistent, you'll find a Caecilian being eaten by 3.
Very lucky.
3 coral snakes.
While being fossilized.
Yes, and playing a banjo. That's the
trifecta.
Yeah, it is the trifecta. Anyway, so that's a plea for all of the listeners to go out and do some observations and find some cool stuff and then post it on social media and iNaturalist and elsewhere. I know Herpmapper is quite popular in the US, so that's another one that a lot of people are using for these kinds of purposes. You can even, I think, put things directly to GBIF if you really want to, although GBIF scrapes it from everywhere else, so you might as well not bother. So,
thanks,
cool.
Mark.
That's the positive message.
Yes.
All right.
And I think we're going to jump from one snake to the other snake.
Are we jumping from snake to snake?
Are we? Are we talking about the Anaconda paper?
Oh shit! Yes. I forgot completely. Yeah, we're going to talk about the anacondas. So basically, my friends. As you may recall, in our last episode 24, which was called My Anaconda Don't Want None, we talked about a paper by Rivas et al. Published in the MDPI journal Diversity, wherein they described a new species of anaconda. And we also discussed about how that was perhaps not the right thing to do, and also was based on a very, very bad set of data. The article in question, in the interim, in the month since we recorded that article, has received a large number of views.
To put it mildly.
Over almost 64,000 views of this article, which is, of course, open access. It has an altmetric score of over 2,000, which for people who are keeping count, that's very, very high. It has... So in our last episode, we kind of tore it apart a little bit, and I made the prediction or dropped the hint that there were responses on the way. Those responses have... the response that I was aware of already is still not out, but 2 responses have already been published in the journal Bionomia, one of them just a month and a week after the first paper was published. In fact, both of them a month and a week after the first paper was published, because they were published on the same day. Both of these papers, one led by Alain Dubois and a whole team, including various other people, and a second paper in the same issue, by Juan de Vázquez Restrepo et al. Both of them have quite similar titles. So the first title by the paper by Vázquez Restrepo is on the validity of the recently described northern green anaconda Eunectes achaema. And the one by Dubois et al. Is nomenclatural problems raised by the recent description of a new anaconda species, Squamata serpentis boidae, with a nomenclatural review of the genus Eunectes. I believe the other responses that I'm aware of are still going to come out, so there will be more. Now, I have not read these responses in any detail because I don't have access to them because they're behind a paywall, which is not very effective for contradicting something that is open access. That's a topic for another day.
Yeah.
But the overall vibe of these papers is along the same lines, and you get this also from the abstracts. There are clear huge problems with the taxonomy involved in the Riebestal paper. The name that has been established, Akema, is not valid and should not be used. There will be probably forthcoming reanalyses of the data that were involved in that paper in order to establish what actually is going on within these things. I still think that there is one interesting point, and I've actually written about this a little bit on Tumblr as well. One relatively interesting outcome of the paper is that there does seem to be discrepancy in terms of genetic distances within the yellow anacondas compared to the green anacondas and the multiple different names. I think the takeaway message there is that actually the yellows have been oversplit already. And so unsplitting the yellows would probably be a good thing to do. And that point has also been kind of brought up by these various responses. But yes, so this paper was above water for about a month and a bit. Obviously, following the debate on ResearchGate would also have given you a good clue to how well it was faring in the community. But it has already been dismissed. So
I want to say I think it's interesting that usually once the damage is done, so to speak, we don't see much in the way of follow-up. Well, like once the media takes something and runs with it, we don't usually see the aftermath of people going, now wait a second. And in this, you actually did get that because it was so fast.
Yeah.
It's also anacondas, so there's a lot of
anacondas.
Yes.
Yeah. But there were even people accusing them of all kinds of stuff that I think was out of left field, and it was crazy.
I think that we might have proximity bias, though, because we are very exposed to this. The thousands of people who will have been exposed to the National Geographic article, and I think it even made it into New York Times and stuff, like tens of thousands of people are walking around now with the idea that, oh, another giant snake. Okay, that's not super detrimental, but it's factually incorrect. And it does do damage to global understanding of this thing. Undoing that damage at a 1-to-1 ratio is not possible without, actually, it's just not possible.
And be prepared to have a million, people coming in years to come. Every time you do anything about anacondas, you know that actually this species, that's going to happen.
Yeah, because it's going to be, for a lot of people, I imagine there are going to be like 3 things that they know about anacondas. They're big snakes, they eat big things.
And there's a new one.
And there's a new one. Well, okay, maybe they know they're aquatic, but maybe not. So I think that a media story that makes these kinds of waves, it needs to be based on really good information. We actually saw a very similar thing happen with this chameleon paper that was published a couple of years ago. Actually, the paper itself was really good, but the press release that came out, because it was looking at genetic distance or genetic diversity within panther chameleons, within Furcifer pardalis, and they showed that there's quite a bit of structure, population structure, and that correlates also with color forms. And then the press release that they made was like, 13 species of Furcifer pardalis. So it's actually a species complex. There are 13 new species here, which is just, first of all, it's not what it says in the paper. And secondly, it's not true. So you get, that one was particularly irksome because the authors were very involved in or at least the authors were acclaimed to be the authors of the article were also the authors of the press release. And when those two things are the same person, that's not good. When the two things don't agree with each other. The damage from that has been difficult to control in the chameleon circles. And I think we'll see the same thing here, where it's very, very difficult to do damage control on something like this.
What did you said proximity bias? That is the nicest way you've ever called me a nerd.
Oh no, but I think that we have proximity. We are exposed to these things. We are, you, dear listener, are one of the very few who are, directly in proximity with the news at its source. And
you're right. I just mean that I saw more pushback on that than and follow up than we usually see with these kinds of things.
Certainly, yeah, that's definitely true. I think that if the paper were retracted, we would see still more, but I don't honestly, from having seen the authors' responses on various sites,
They're doubling down.
I can't, yeah, exactly. I cannot expect that they're going to do that.
Yeah.
But in general, I think that there is because we're exposed to these Facebook sites and the algorithms know that we're primed to look into and see these kinds of results. They are feeding that to us, which I don't think is necessarily true for the general public, who the algorithm thinks, oh, cool snake, they'll want to see this story, and that's it.
Coming from the world of paleontology, where this happens often, I can tell you this is very difficult. Once something is out like that, it's very difficult to, even if corrections are made.
But what about Nanotyrannus,
though?
Tyrannosaurus is a scavenger.
There are 3 new species of Tyrannosaurus. That was recent. Still people going with it. So
it happened with Triceratops also, right?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about the 3 new species.
And
but Tyrannosaurus got split recently, and it's
Regina
and Imperator and whatever. It's a mess, and it actually I would imagine that, like what Mark said, that's very important. If you're gonna do a response to a paper that is open access that has had such an impact, please do an open access response. Yes, so it has some sort of opportunity because it's never going to have the same impact.
Yeah. I mean, it's anyway never going to have the same impact, especially if it's like niggling about rules and whatever. But you still need to have, if you have a paper that has 63,000 views, comprising largely views from the general public, you can't then publish the response in a place where not even my institute has access to this.
You're doing the someone is wrong on the internet meme, but then charging money to.
Yes. On that delightful note, so we leave you with these 2 major takeaways, my friends. Takeaway number 1: keep your video camera out and peeled on all the animals you see. Takeaway number 2: if you're going to tell somebody that they're wrong on the internet, do it in a way that is accessible for all.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yes.
Right. Gabriel, where can one find you on the internet?
I am at Serpent Illus on all the socials. I'm on X or whatever, Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram and on Facebook, although I don't like it. I'm also there at Gabriel Illustration. And on my website, gabrielugetto.com.
And Hiro?
I am at HeroLKnight25 on X and Blue Sky, and at HeroLTive on Instagram.
Excellent. And Ethan?
I'm at Black Mud Puppy pretty much everywhere that matters.
Excellent. You can find me on all the things, including the ones where I'm on with regret, like Instagram and Facebook. At Mark Shirts, except for on Facebook at MD Shirts, because I'm bad at things. You can follow the podcast on all of the socials, basically, at SquaMates Pod. One other additional thing. We here have a new Instagram account at NHMD Herpetology, where you can follow some of the cool things that my herpetological collections assistant and I are up to in the collection, and collection manager and all of the team here at the Natural History Museum of Denmark, what we're doing in the herpetology world at the moment. You can find us on Instagram. Maybe we'll be on other platforms too in the nearest future. But there's a lot of cool pictures of specimens and stuff that are getting posted there. Yes, right. Back to the normal line. You can follow the podcast everywhere that you can listen to podcasts. If you listen to podcasts on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. We might be on other platforms, but honestly, if you're not listening to us on those platforms, then you don't.
Who are you?
Or how would you be doing? How would you be here? How are you here? Anyway, good. You can send us questions at SquaMatesPod at SquaMatesPod@gmail.com. Send us your requests, send us your thoughts, send us your feelings, send us pictures.
Yeah, we want requests.
We would like to have episode requests. They give us fuel that we then ignore. It's really, really nice.
And Mark wants your observations also.
We do not want your observations. Please find another herpetologist who has time for the observations. It will be more rewarding for you.
Someday we'll compile a list of friendly neighborhood herpetologists.
Yes, maybe one day. I will not do that. Other people will do that. And as we say on the show,
Hakuna Squamata.